both surprised by the way we looked. The years had changed us too. We smiled and both embraced like old friends often do.
Hello again. Welcome to another episode of Gung Ho. It's October 29, 2019. I think you know me by now. Joe Giannini, Marine, Vietnam, lawyer. I have a special guest with me, George Motz. This is our 7th show together. George, during the Vietnam War, was something I never even heard of, a casualty notification officer. So he had a very, I would say, unusual, unique experience during his service. And somehow we come together when we talk about racism, our attitude, our beliefs, I think, only because we were in the service. He was in the Army and I was in the Marine Corps. So let's start out. When you were a toddler, where were you?
I was born and grew up in Nassau County in Garden City. It was a wonderful community to grow up in. It was very white. There was not a single person of color living in the neighborhood. And in those days, and back in the late 40s and early 50s, basically you had a lot of people came from the next town over, Hempstead, came in as basically maids, black maids, and they came in and they either cleaned or they cooked or whatever they did. We had a black maid named Nora, we all loved dearly, and she came in 5.5 days a week and cooked our lunch and dinners for us and served it to us and whatever else. If I look back, I think one of the fascinating things about how I grew up was the fact that everyone was having dinner in the dining room, my father, my mother, my 2 sisters and myself, and my grandmother. And I would always leave midway through the main course to go out in the kitchen and have dinner at the kitchen table with Nora, our maid. And we sit and talk to her about life in the South. She grew up in Aiken, South Carolina. And we had a very good relationship, and that lasted her whole life. And that to me is my early sign that I was not a prejudiced person, and I enjoyed it. But she was basically a servant for us. In those days, she worked 5.5 days for 8-hour days for $45 a week. Now that's not much money by today's standards, but in those days it was considered the average salary for a week for a servant coming in preparing your meals. But so that was my earliest experience with the blacks. We had no black Catholic grammar school in Garden City, no black students. Public high school in Garden City, no black students. We had an excellent football team, which is unusual because most of the schools around Manhasset and Hempstead had mostly black players at that time, which tended in those days to be better athletes, and yet we did very well. But it was.
Did you when in that situation did you ever witness or experience any racism toward a black person?
Never once. There wasn't a single time when I felt that I didn't see anything visibly, and I didn't really hear of much. It wasn't talked about. Since there were no blacks in the school system, whatever else, it wasn't a topic of conversation.
All right. I was born in Brooklyn, Kings County Hospital, and we lived in, when I was a toddler, we lived in an area called Canarsie. Canarsie was a really tough neighborhood, mostly Italians and some Irish. There was one black family in the whole area, the Hubbards. Everybody knew them. We knew where they lived, but I had no contact with them. When I was about maybe 6 years old, my dad moved us out of Canarsie out to Nassau County. We moved around, but everywhere we moved, there were no blacks. There were no blacks. Had no contact with blacks in grammar school, high school, and so I had no concept about racism. I never saw it, I never heard it. Oh, wait a minute. One thing happened to me now when I look back. In those days, a toddler could run around like on a beach, and the parents weren't concerned about their safety. They didn't think they'd be kidnapped or assaulted or anything like that. And one day at Coney Island, I must have been like 4 or 5 years old, and I was playing in the waves, and a wave knocked me down, and I went on my belly, and it pushed me into this woman's ankle, you might say. My head hit her ankle. And I was like, really having a good time. And I looked up and I was smiling, and she put her foot on my head and gave me a face plant. It was a black woman. And I started crying. But it still, it didn't register. All I know is this woman did something nasty to me. But that was something that, when you look back. All right, so again, all through grammar school, all through high school. Then I go to college, Hofstra University actually. Maybe there were 8,000 students, and they maybe had a half a dozen black people. This is the first time I've actually been in contact with black people, because one of them was a wrestler, and he was on the team, on the Hofstra wrestling team, and I was a wrestler. And I became friends with him. I went to his family's home, he came to my home, and his color didn't mean anything to me. In fact, my dad always said, he said a lot of things, but one of the things he said, you never judge a man by his color. I mean, he said a lot of things. That was one of the things. And I took him seriously. And again, this photograph is my mom and dad, probably in the early 40s, maybe around 43. And this one here is them on VJ Day in 1945. But my father was in the service. He was in the Army twice. And he was very patriotic. And this is me. This is crazy. Parents used to take photographs of us on horses. That's me in Canarsie, maybe 3 years old.
That's a pony, not a horse.
All right. So I'm in college, and there was a jock fraternity called Crown and Lance. All football players, wrestlers, and some basketball players. And you had to be nominated to become a member. And so what would happen is they would come together, a meeting, and someone would offer your name as a nominee, and you have to pledge. So I got into the fraternity. It was crazy. The pledging was really sadistic. I mean, it was something similar to Paris Island, actually.
Okay.
It was very sadistic and violent in some way. But, well, I was a member of Crown and Lance. So we're having a meeting, and we're nominating people, right, to become candidates and pledge. And I just say, this guy, I guess his name is like John Ponda, right? I offer his name. He's on the wrestling team. And this guy, we had a one-ball system. If anybody said, I ball him, that's it. It's over. No discussion.
Okay.
So I nominated him. And this guy stands up and he says, I ball him. I look over and it's this fat piece who's in the fraternity only because his brother's a football player.
Okay.
I even remember his name, Giannini. And I said to him, why? And he said, because he's a nigger. And I got really angry. And I went on a campaign then to change the ball system, and I did it. They thought I was crazy. I said, I want to change our Constitution. You can't change the Constitution. I said, yes, you can. We got plenty of amendments to to our own Constitution. So what I did, and I made them do it. We did it. We changed our Constitution, and if someone balled somebody, and anyone had reason to believe that there was some type of motive behind it, whatever it be, racial, religious, a Jew, whatever, you could challenge it. Once you challenged that ball, then the vote went to the whole meeting, everyone there.
Okay.
And if the candidate passed by a majority, the ball was overridden. I did that. I changed it.
Okay. Okay.
So that was my first experience like that, where I saw such an ugly thing happen, and it really made me very angry.
Okay. Well, I'll take you up through my, after high school, I went to college in Washington, D.C., Georgetown University. And the College of Arts and Science, there were about 8 colleges there, but the College of Arts and Science is the basic undergraduate school there. There was not a single black student in my class of 740 starting out. And, but they were in the School of Foreign Service and the business school and elsewhere, but not in the college. So my roommate freshman year was a black man from Africa, from Kenya, Africa, named Andrew Mugambi. And I was the youngest kid in the class. I was 17, and he was 29. He had been educated in Africa by the Jesuits, and he came over, and he had an opportunity to go to college at Georgetown. And we got along very well, and then I was being very respectful. And in those days, for us, the proper way to refer to a black person was a colored person. That was the perfect thing. And after he'd had about enough of me calling people colored people, he said to me, why are you calling me colored? I'm black, you're white, you're not clear. And that was his comment. And I said, you know, I hadn't thought of it that way, you know. So that was the end of that. But I did it because I was trying to be respectful. And he understood that, but it was such a logical retort to have. And he stayed the whole way through Georgetown. And we didn't room after that, not that we didn't want. He wanted to go and hang out with people from the Foreign Service School, which is his main program. He went back to Africa after that and spent the rest of his life over there. But that was my first really close encounter with a black person.
Did anybody mistreat him because of his color, because he was black?
I suppose some did. I mean,
did you witness it?
I did not witness it. And Georgetown had a whole cross-country population there. We had one of my roommates from California, one was from Texas. They're all over the place. So it wasn't, there were some from the South, obviously. In fact, oddly enough, during the Civil War, there were 900 graduates of Georgetown who served in the Civil War in the military, 800 from the South, 100 from the North. So at that point, it was mostly Southern people in there. But when I was down there, it was pretty evenly balanced between North and South. And no, I didn't. No one picked on him that I ever saw it, and there was nobody else there to pick on. So.
All right. So I leave Hofstra University in 1966, and already Uncle Sam has sent me a draft notice. So right out of the university, I graduated in January. I enlisted in the Marine Corps in March 1966. I enlisted. I had gone to ROTC. I didn't even think about being an officer. I don't. But when I got down to the induction center, our draft board was Great Neck, Nassau. 300 white boys. That's what it was. 300 white
really?
boys.
Okay.
By the end of the second day, there was about 90 left. And I was about to be inducted into the Army. And these 2 Marines walked in dressed blues. And they said, we're looking for volunteers for the finest fighting force in the world, the Marine Corps. I looked at them and I was impressed. I was like,
understandably.
And the other thing in the back of my mind is that I was a surfer. I said, Marines, you know, water, they're amphibious. I'll be able to surf. So I thought, first, Marines have more of a chance of surviving with these guys because they got a good rep. They never leave anyone behind, and I could surf. So I raised my hand.
That's the kind of logic we have at that age, though. That makes perfect sense.
So off I went with 5 other boys. Was it 5 of us? 5 white boys from Nassau County. But I think there were 2 groups, but all white boys. And we went to Paris Island. Whoa, that was like, you know, they flew us by commercial jet down to someplace in, I guess, South Carolina, put us on a bus, like a Greyhound bus, and then we arrived at Paris Island like maybe about 3 a.m. in the morning. And I was sleeping. A lot of people were sleeping. All of a sudden, we heard this screaming, and it was a drill instructor, cursing, screaming, "You you know, oh my God, I got so scared, I came out of my sleep, I jumped up, hit the overhang. Anyhow, it was nuts, it was crazy. And I wound up in a squad bay, a barracks with 80 Marines. I was the oldest one. I was the only one with a college education.
Really? Okay.
And there were a lot of blacks, Negroes,
Right.
and poor whites. And this is the first time ever I'm around a lot of Negroes and poor white people. And we went through Paris Island, and, you know, it was 9 or 10 weeks. There were no problems, you know,
Yeah.
between the black and the whites. No problems at all. But one time we were swabbing down the deck, and maybe I was in charge of the work party or whatever, and then I looked over and to this, you know, at this black Marine, Negro Marine, and I said to him something like, "Hurry up, boy," and he looked at me and he said, "I'm not your boy." And I knew I said something wrong, didn't I? That was the end of it.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm in the Marine Corps, and because I'm in the Marine Corps, and they've been integrated for a while, and the first one to do it, the first service to do it, here I am with all these blacks, and I was fine.
Well, I had ROTC at Georgetown, and the first encounter I had with blacks in terms of was ROTC summer camp, Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania, and that was a 6-week summer camp program, and it was probably a quarter black and then 3/4 white, and that was out in pup tents sleeping at night with Walter Wren was my bunkmate, 6'6" big heavy black man. And 3 nights in a pup tent, you know, you either become friends or enemies. And I never had any problem then either. But that was the first real exposure to it.
25% of the class were black, you said?
At the summer camp.
Wow.
Yeah, they came from a lot of schools all over the East Coast and down south a little bit. The black schools down south. So I think there were 40 colleges represented at that thing. There were 2,000, 2,500 people in that summer camp. So that was my first real exposure besides Andrew and my roommate in Georgetown freshman year. But bottom line was that then I went from there to a year of law school, 100% white law school the first year at Fordham Law School in New York. And then I opted to step out and join the pick up my second lieutenant commission that I had from Georgetown and started active duty in December of 1964, and then down to basic training at Fort Lee, basic officer training, and 90% white folks down there for that also. And then the last week I was there, the assignments came out at Reveille, and at that point, very few were assigned to Vietnam. There's some over there to observe and whatever else. But the majority went to stateside postings, and some went to Germany. And I waited for my call, figured I'd be going to Vietnam for whatever reason. And to Charleston, South Carolina, great assignment. So I went down to Charleston, got in the car that afternoon, drove down, and arrived there at dusk. So this is now March 7th of 1965, and it was 75 degrees at nighttime in March 7th. The very new first thing I noticed. Second thing I noticed when I checked into the motel for the night, a very attractive girl, white girl, came out with that, "Wow, they're very heavy Southern accent. I don't know what else she was saying," you know, like that. I thought it was put on for my benefit. I didn't realize it was real. And that was my first 2 impressions: the warm weather and the really deep Southern accent. The next day I had breakfast at a local diner before I went up to my Army post, and I had my first grits with a lot of butter on it, so it's getting experience at the time. Got to the depot, was assigned basically, met with the commanding officer. It was a transportation depot. I was a quartermaster trained person, and told I was going to be a military personnel officer. And that was very small, 8 officers and 2 enlisted men, and then 400 or 500 civilians, all white, mostly all white, 90% white. And I had very little contact with them. Personnel, I was dealing with retired families, survivor assistance, helping families. The father, the husband had died in his 70s or 80s or whatever, and I was helping him with the financial stuff for the widow. So that's the way it worked. And then everything turned on a dime after that when I got assigned. Survivor assistance was pretty much entirely white older women that I was dealing with. Then came the war built up in the spring and summer of 1965, and it came into the casualty notification part of it.
They changed.
Yeah,
So tell them how they
well,
changed.
That's right. This is before. In a case like this, that's a black woman with her son there in the photo, and she's obviously holding in her hand the Western Union telegram, which is what was used. That would be sent out to the person, in the case his mother, and then I would go out within 48 hours and talk to the family. They were still in shock, but it wasn't the initial notification. The Army decided in the first quarter of 1966, March 15th of 1966, okay, the war is not popular at all with the population, but do something to make it better. So the Army decided in-person notifications by a field grade officer. Okay, and since I was doing survivor assistance, that was a natural thing for me to do the notification. And I've explained this before, but the getting in my car and reciting what I had to say. The President of the United States, Department of the Army, the people of the United States regret to inform your son that died as a result of a gunshot wound, that he died at approximately whatever time. And I got halfway to make the first notification, which was to a poor black family just outside of Charleston, and I pulled over and I said, "My God, I'm going to destroy a family." I was so intent on making sure I got the words right, which ended up being useless anyway. No one ever listened to the words past the first 3 or 4. And that was my first experience, not only making the notification, but staying with the family for 21 days till the body came home, visiting them every day and helping them out and whatever else, which ended up being a big plus for me because it enabled me to...
Before you went to Charleston, South Carolina, had you been there before?
Never was there.
So you didn't know anything about racism or poverty or anything like you?
Well, what I had been told as I was assigned down there by my northern friends, New Yorkers and whatever, was that the white folks down there treat the black folks very poorly, and that there's no equality whatsoever on any level at all. And when I went down there, I realized that it wasn't really the case. Equality in the North was a given, but there were very few close friendships between blacks and whites. In the South, no equality. That was obviously not on the table. But the black people were taken care of maternalistically by their neighbors, basically. If they needed a little money or they needed to go to a doctor or whatever else, they would take them and help them. So, but to me, that was a positive surprise I wasn't expecting. The real positive surprise when I started going to these funerals and arranging them and stuff for the 2/3 of the case I had with poor black families was the fact that the white population, if it was a soldier, with only a couple of exceptions, it didn't matter black, white, green, or yellow, he was a soldier, and they respected that person. They respected the soldier.
All right. Here's what happens. I go through Parris Island, no racial incidents, not even, I had nothing like that in my mind. We just went through Parris Island. We graduated from Parris Island, and they sent us to Camp Geiger for further training. They called it Advanced Infantry Training, I think it was. And we trained together for about another couple of months. Same guys. So the guys that I was with in Parris Island, I was with them now at Camp Geiger in a barracks, and we were training together, blacks and whites and Hispanic kids. And all during this time, we had no leave. And we couldn't really use a phone. You couldn't use a phone, and you weren't allowed visitors. On one occasion, my parents came down to see me after I graduated from Parris Island. Just came in for a few hours, and they let me see them. But and they had a little establishment we called it the Slop Shoot, where you can go in and drink some 3.2 beer, right? I'm not a drinker. So one day, I went over there with 5 other white kids. For some reason, I don't know why, white boys were called Chucks. Black boys were called Splibs. Marines were called Jarheads. Navy were called Squids. Anyhow, I went with 5 white boys to the Slop Shoot, and they were drinking, and they got drunk. This was a big deal for us to do that. And we go back to the barracks, and we get, I don't know what you would call it, we were like ambushed, but all of a sudden about 20 blacks came after us, right? We had one kid there, his name was Juby. We called him Juby. He was from the South. He was over 6 foot. He was the biggest white boy. And this fight starts, 5 or 6 of us against about 20 of them. And I could see that this black guy is beating the piss out of Juby. Juby can't defend himself. I mean, this really big guy, about 6'4", about 230 pounds. And I just like made my way over that way. I pushed Juby aside. Now I'm looking up at this guy, and he's looking down at me, right?
Yeah.
I'm not drunk. So he hits me with a he tries to hit me with a right hook.
Okay.
But as he was throwing the punch, I ducked. So it hit me, it glanced over, and I went forward, and I hooked his leg, and I hit him with my shoulder, and he went down on the concrete. And I moved up right away, and I put him in a chokehold. I mean, I was choking him. I had his arm and his neck.
Okay.
And I had him in such a way that he couldn't get up. He was like 100 pounds more than me, but he couldn't get up. And I was choking him. And when the other Marines saw that, they stopped. Everybody stopped fighting. And he came over and they were looking at what I was doing. I was choking this guy.
Yeah.
I could kill him if I want. And I held him down, and finally he said, I give up. This big guy gave up. That's it. Fight ended. He wasn't from our barracks. He left. About 20 minutes later, he came back and he says, I want Joe, tell Joe to come out or come to the door. So I went to the door, and he was standing there, and he had a metal pipe in his hand. And he said to me, I'm going to get you. And when he used that phrase, I'm going to get you, I knew that he wasn't ready to fight me again. I said, fuck off. And he just left. So now, what happened is I became like the default, and there was no such word. I became like the default leader of the Chucks. Without even realizing that there was something going on here. So what happens? We get some new guys. Oh, we're over.
Line, 'cause friends are friends for all time. Where have my old friends gone? Where are they now? Used to be a walk away in my hometown. As far can be, but in my heart they're close to. Yes, in my heart they're close to. In my heart they're close to me.